Hallå! Hör ni mig? Bra, 1, 2, 3 som vi säger hemma i Skaraborg. Warmly welcome to House of... där, nu kom ljudet helt plötsligt. Jag tyckte väl att det var lite lågt. Ska vi försöka hitta rätt volym då? Tackar. Welcome to House of Sweden. My name is Urban Ahlin. I'm the new Swedish ambassador here in Washington, D.C. It's a great pleasure to see so many of you here for our event, the Green Transition Summit. And first, I would like to thank the Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative for arranging this first summit here at the House of Sweden, and also Atlantic Council for co-hosting the event today. And I would also like to thank all the speakers for today, and also our partners Atlas Copco and Volvo Group. You will soon hear from our Executive Director, Linda Andrén, at the Green Transition Initiative, regarding the agenda and the topics for today. And the basic understanding of this event is actually that we think we have a story to tell. Sweden and US has decided themselves to do the green transition. We have a lot of knowledge, but we have also a lot of things to learn from each other, and there are lots of activities that we can do better together. So we are hoping that the discussions today will bring more cooperation and more understanding about what Sweden is doing and what the US is doing. And we think we have some strong actors in the room with high ambitions. And at least we, from the Swedish Embassy, has brought one actor with high ambitions here today. And that is our Deputy Prime Minister, Ebba Busch, who is our Minister for Energy, Business and Industry. You are extremely welcome to come here and address the audience about what Sweden is doing and your high ambitions on the Green Transition Initiative. The floor is yours, Ebba.
Thank you so much, dear Ambassador. Great to have you here at Play in Washington and getting to see you in full action. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it really is an honor for me to attend the Green Transition Summit here today. And I would like to extend my gratitude to the Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative, the Swedish Embassy, and the Atlantic Council for organizing this summit. And of course, an extra thank you to Atlas Copco and Volvo Group that are making this possible. I really have been looking so much forward to this event. Let me start by just setting the context that Sweden is navigating through in this very special time in history. Europe is in many ways an economic powerhouse, but in recent times, well, you've all seen it stumbling a little bit. Businesses are facing excessive energy costs, regulatory burdens, and political uncertainty in many countries. And the main causes are Russia's unlawful, full-scale invasion on our Ukrainian brothers and sisters, an uneven recovery from the pandemic, and then, which is basically fundamentally a good thing, but still an early phase out of fossil-free energy. And this has in turn sparked a quite severe energy crisis, high inflation, supply disruptions, and uncertainty about the economic future. And now you're wondering if we brought you down here to gloom your mood for the years to come, and no. I would say I remain an optimist, but I would like to be a realistic, reality-based optimist. Despite all of these challenges, I truly believe that there is reason to be optimistic about the future. I am convinced that by increasing our resilience and leaving politics out of energy policy, I'd like to say that again, because I see it as somewhat of being on a global mission of taking politics out of energy policy and putting physics back in. And I'll try and develop a little bit on that and what I mean by that. But we need to find a way to reduce our dependencies on authoritarian states, and through continued innovation, we can reach our high-set climate targets. We can be that the yes to the million-dollar question: is it possible to combine high-set climate goals, high-set climate targets, with economic growth, with fair jobs and a stronger welfare for our citizens? And the Swedish answer to that historically has been yes. And the future answer to that will still be yes. But a lot of the answers, hopefully, is in the transition that we are seeing in this room as well. If we look back over the past 100 years, Sweden has gone from being actually one of Europe's poorest countries to becoming one of the most prosperous. Groundbreaking innovations, hard work, and constant renewal remain three important components in building Sweden strong. The industrialization of Sweden really started in the middle of the 19th century, and since then our economy has been growing and export-oriented. A country where well-managed natural resources have been really been a decisive engine for our prosperity. For whom furthers his fortune will receive twofold. Both our nations, Sweden and the United States, live and breathe innovation and entrepreneurship. On both sides of the Atlantic, hardworking people have worked through the sweat of their brows by striving, but also through curiosity, constantly searching for new ways to make everyday life a little easier to bear. Because really, that's what it's all about, leaving behind a society that is in better shape than the one we inherited. And we have done this before, and we're about to do it again. We are now facing what rightly can be called nothing but an historic task. A green transition, or rather a green industrial revolution, where we break our dependence on fossil fuels through electrification and fighting climate change with full force, while at the same time then creating jobs and economic prosperity. The culmination of these challenges we have faced in recent times and the task at hand has created an anxious conviction that disaster needs to be averted. I think if you look out, not only looking at our respective countries, but just looking globally, really, a lot of the governing now is being done from a place of fear rather than governing with hope, as it has become a prevalent form of leadership. And I said earlier this year that for a lot of people that hear the word climate, they feel anxiety. Some of them feel it for sort of the right reasons, because it really is a huge task that we need to be able to fight and meet. Others see it feel anxiety because they're wondering, is it even a mountain that we have the possibility to climb? I would like for more of us, every time they hear climate, not to think climate anxiety, but to connect climate with hope. I would like for every time you hear the word climate to think job opportunities instead. And that's the journey upon which we are embarking right this moment. However, the anxiety is not unfounded, as the green transformation of our economies represents the greatest socio-economic transformation of our time. Our ability to meet our targets will depend on our ability to supply enough fossil-free energy to scale up breakthrough technologies like fossil-free steel made of hydrogen-induced iron ore. Those are possibly the most beautiful words at this time, hydrogen-reduced iron ore. This summit's ambition is to showcase the Green Transitions Initiative's ongoing work to establish system pilot projects to demonstrate existing solutions to accelerate green transition. And an example of a project that really started out as a pilot is Hybrid, an initiative by SSAB, LKAB, and Vattenfall to develop fossil-free steel production. Hybrid is now preparing a demonstration plant in Gällivare, at LKAB iron ore mine. With this facility, HYBRIT takes the next step towards production of sponge iron on an industrial scale. The plan is for the facility to be completed in 2026 and for the entire production to have been adjusted before the year 2050. At the same time, in a different part of Sweden, SSAB's blast furnace in Oxelösund must be converted to an electric arc furnace. This means that SSAB will be able to produce ore-based, fossil-free steel on a commercial scale in 2026. This is not a fantasy, it's a reality. In February 2021, the plans to build a new steel mill in Boden were presented by H2 Green Steel. Like LKAB and SSAB, H2 Green Steel intention is also to produce steel without fossil energy. This process is based on hydrogen, where hydrogen is produced by electrolysis with electricity from fossil-free energy sources. On May the 22nd this year, a multi-billion-dollar agreement was signed between German ThyssenKrupp Nuclear on the construction of one of the world's largest electrolyzer plants for the production of hydrogen in Boden. So, when I started off by saying there's reason to be optimistic, there is reason to see hope in all of this, this really is two great examples of this. To facilitate these innovations and many more, Sweden will have to continue producing fossil-free electricity at competitive prices. I know the US is a competitive country, and rightly so, and this is where we like to really provide a competitive advantage through the fossil-free electricity production at a good price. Our energy mix is already fossil-free, with hydropower making up 40%, nuclear 30%, wind 20%, biomass 9%, and finally photovoltaic of about 1% and increasing. However, to realize these ambitions and to scale up these breakthrough technologies with competitiveness intact, we need to plan for an electricity demand of at least, and I would like to emphasize, at least 300 terawatt hours in 2045. That means a doubling of the electricity production or the current electricity system that is in play in Sweden at the moment. So to succeed with electrification, the electricity system needs to be able to deliver electricity where it is needed, when it is needed. It sounds basic, but it's that type of basic understanding of physics that we need to sort of bring politics back to. And that is why I have decided that when Sweden moves forward in the years to come, we're taking the ideology and sort of the politics out of energy policy. It will be taken out and physics back in. So instead, we will define the characteristics and geographical location for energy production based on the laws of physics. There will be no natural fixation with any particular technology. However, as we speak, nuclear energy is the only fossil-free energy source that is mature, thus has the right characteristics to support the electricity system, and that can be expanded on a large scale to meet the challenges ahead. It's like I've said to a lot of the representatives that I've met with over the years, if you love solar power, if you love wind power, at least in a Swedish context, you gotta love nuclear power as well, because it provides that base load that makes it possible to push all of those power productions into the system and still make sure that you have a stable energy system that is ready at hand for households and companies' investments for the years to come. So these criteria will also have to start to apply to weather-dependent technologies, pushing them to mature and to start contributing to those type of support systems that is needed in the years to come. Finally, then, I would like to touch upon the de-risking approach that has recently become an integral part of EU policy. Just imagine that in the future, this contemporary age might be called the age of the critical raw materials. Russia's weaponization of oil and gas has clearly been a wake-up call for some, but maybe not all of us. However, the necessary conclusions that have been drawn is that dependence on Russian gas might be dwarfed by another dependence, and I don't say this lightly. I think that it might have been dwarfed by another dependence on authoritarian states for the necessary critical raw materials and components needed to enable the green transition. And we cannot take this lightly. For example, the European Union consumes about 20% of the global production of metals, 20%, but produces only 3%. Nearly 90% of all rare earth metals and 60% of all lithium are processed in China. So when we are now moving forward, and we've moved forward quite swiftly also during the Swedish EU presidency with the Fit for 55 package, we really put all of the eggs in one basket. Do you even say that in English? In Sweden you do. You get the concept. It's the opposite of de-risking. We really put all of the eggs in one basket, and we said that the future is green transition, but right now we're 100 import dependent for lithium, for example. And so much of all that we are needed and dependent on to make that green transition, all of it has to go through China. Then you do the math. And this is where Sweden really can contribute, and I think where Sweden and the US really can benefit from an even closer collaboration together in this area as well. Because earlier this year, I had the great pleasure to join LKAB when they revealed the discovery of Europe's largest deposit of rare earth metals in Kiruna, providing a potential boost to the EU efforts to rely less on imported raw materials from authoritarian states. I was highly mocked by my colleagues in the Swedish government. Oh, what a coincidence, they found this largest deposit when you arrived to Kiruna. Obviously, they've had their eyes on this deposit for a long time. I believe that the future is bright and that there are reasons to be optimistic. I would like to emphasize that again. If we work together through initiatives just like this, we have the opportunity to ensure a transition that creates jobs and increases competitiveness. Even though we are still suffering from the external shocks, there are great opportunities ahead on the other side of this sort of economic winter. Through collaboration and cooperation across the Atlantic, the green transition could continue to create more jobs than we can actually fill. I dare to believe that we will manage to meet our high-set climate targets while increasing our competitiveness and strengthening resilience. And as I've said a couple of times before, when we entered into government last year, I said difficult problems are best solved together, and that's why we're here today. Thank you.
On behalf of Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative, I would like to express how delighted we are to see you all here. This is the very first Green Transition Summit, and it's hosted together with the Embassy of Sweden in US, Atlantic Council, and in partnership with Volvo Group and Atlas Copco. Thank you also, Urban, for hosting us in your house, and for Deputy Prime Minister Ebba Busch to give us hope in this transition. My name is Linda Andrén, and I'm the Executive Director of Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative. Together with my team, I work towards accelerating green transition, but in collaboration with you. As we heard from the previous speaker, Sweden and the United States already have close partnership in multiple areas. So with our office here in Washington, D.C., and backed by Business Sweden, the Swedish Energy Agency, the Swedish Innovation Agency, and the Embassy, We focus on thematic areas: electromobility, renewable energy, sustainable industry, and smart green buildings. We are also establishing system pilots. And why? Well, we do believe that to drive the transition, it's important to create positive stories as well. And also with research and innovation projects, all aiming at developing new technologies and innovations with a focus on the greenhouse gas emissions. So I don't know what slide I'm showing now, but that's how opportunistic adaptation looks like. Before going forward to the agenda, I would like to also say that the restrooms is behind the elevator, and in case of emergency, please follow the exit signs. And this afternoon, hopefully this is the agenda slide. No? Yes, good, thank you. I think collaboration is good. During the event today, we will listen to strategies and tools for the cities. We will also listen to greening of the construction industry and examples of how that can be done. And in the end, we will listen to resources needed for the transition. I do think that this afternoon will be very exciting, but to treat us as our dear guest, we will also serve Swedish fika. And in case you saw that Ebba got a small gift, that will also be served at the reception, so please stay. With no further ado, I would like now to introduce the next speaker, and that is Reid Blakemore, Director of Research and Programs at Atlantic Council. Please welcome.
Well, thank you, Linda, for that wonderful introduction and framing for today's summit. And also thank you, Deputy Prime Minister Bush and Ambassador Eileen, for your leadership in advancing shared transatlantic aims and for your welcome here today. I've been to many an event and many a reception in this wonderful building, and it's not just amazing to see us tackling this subject, the green transition, here today, but also an honor to be on stage. And so thank you so much for your partnership and your partnership with the Atlantic Council in particular in this effort. With the frequency of extreme weather events on the rise, a forthcoming stock-taking exercise at COP28 in Dubai this December, and the reminder of how critical energy security is to our lives and livelihoods brought forth by Russia's unjust war in Ukraine, one thing has become clear, more clear than ever before. How we approach the next few years of energy policy and energy investment will have an immense impact on our ability to shape a secure, affordable, and more importantly, sustainable energy system. We're on the cusp now of a profound moment in energy transition and climate action. And navigating this inflection point, if you will, begins with strong partnerships. And that's why I'm thrilled to see that the U.S.-Sweden friendship is meeting the energy and climate challenge, and that will color my remarks this afternoon. This friendship is strong, it's deep, it's historical, and most importantly, it's rooted in shared values and common interests. Sweden was one of the first countries to recognize the United States and played a role in the American Revolution, while millions of Americans identify as being partly or fully of Swedish descent. Beyond our shared history, shared values, and a commitment to human dignity form the most crucial bond between our two countries. Sweden boasts some of the highest voter turnout rates of any democracy in the world, and is a world leader in gender equality, freedom of the press, and rights for journalists. Sweden is a model for free societies everywhere, and it's precisely the type of partner that the United States should look to as we meet the call of climate action and steward the transformation of an energy system to build the net zero energy system of the future. In addition to our shared history and values, economic cooperation helps tie the United States and Sweden together. Last year, bilateral goods trade stood at nearly $25 billion US, helping to create jobs and prosperity on both sides of the Atlantic. Security cooperation is also a crucial part of the relationship. Sweden is on the cusp of NATO membership and cooperates closely with the United States and its allies on critical defense and security issues. Both countries have acted to oppose the Kremlin's illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine. The United States and Sweden are providing armaments to help Kiev defend itself from Putin's war of aggression. Sweden has provided anti-tank weaponry, ammunition, and spare parts, aiding in Ukraine's fight for freedom. The United States, Sweden, and other constitutional democracies stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. And at the Atlantic Council, we plan to do our part to ensure that the transatlantic community effectively meets the call to action with regard to the key security issue of our time. And I start with security because, as Russia's invasion demonstrates, security, in particular energy security, is national security. And where we cooperate on energy security, we must also cooperate on climate action. To frame our discussion over the next few hours, I'd like to make a few observations about the ways in which the United States and Sweden can cooperate to build an energy system which delivers both climate action, energy transformation, and energy security. Climate change, as we know, is not some distant threat. We feel it in our day-to-day lives. This past summer in DC was the hottest in recorded history, and we regularly saw haze caused by breathtaking wildfires in Canada. I grew up in Northern California, which is why I slipped there. Where severe wildfires are now so regularly that my friends and family back home now have to make preparations for wildfire season, akin to how others around the country prepare for hurricane season. That's a transformational change in our environment and one we must address immediately. So we're here today to do something about this very real threat to our way of life and our ability to live freely. We're here today to do the vital work on decarbonization, both for ourselves but also for the generations that come after us. To this end, I want to zoom in on 3 areas of opportunity that I'm glad we'll see covered in this particular afternoon: carbon neutral cities, electric vehicles and charging infrastructure, and critical minerals. First, climate action globally requires attention to decarbonization locally. Engaging cities is critical to these efforts. Cities across the United States are setting climate targets and acting to achieve them. New York City has reduced its emissions by 16% in 1 decade, while Washington, D.C. has cut its carbon footprint by the same amount from 2009 to 2019. Yet more work must be done. In many cities, over 65% of emissions are tied to buildings. These emissions can be mitigated by heat pumps, which Sweden is a leader in providing, in tandem with broader technological efforts to green the grid. Second, we must finish the job to electrify mobility. Both the United States and Sweden are increasingly mitigating transportation emissions via electrification. Battery electric vehicles as a percentage of new U.S. sales almost doubled from 2021 to 2022. More than half of all passenger autos sold in Sweden in 2022 came with a plug. The momentum behind the EV revolution is clear, but will go unfulfilled if we don't simultaneously enable the grid to provide clean, cheap, and easily accessible electricity to power an EV future. We must also ensure that the absence of charging and support infrastructure does not block EV adoption. We need to create the ecosystem of transportation electrification. Finally, we must ensure the resilience of our clean energy supply chains, beginning with the minerals needed to meet our net zero goals. To meet global net zero emission targets overall, 6 times more metals and minerals will be needed compared to 2021. In the United States, our combined total energy technology demand for transition critical minerals like lithium, nickel, and cobalt will be 23 times higher in 2035 than it was in 2021. Put simply, without investing in the resiliency of the mineral supply chain, we will be unable to achieve a decarbonized world. Yet the supply constraints and concentration of these resources place a premium on reliable partnerships to mitigate the mineral intensity of the energy transition. As the EU's largest mining nation with resources from copper to rare earth elements, Sweden has a critical role to play in ensuring that access to critical minerals does not slow or potentially halt the green energy transition. To be clear, these opportunities aren't exhaustive. The foundation of shared history, values, and human capital will enable collaboration between the United States and Sweden across a host of areas, from green steel to offshore wind to heat pumps to clean hydrogen. In closing, tackling climate change will require the U.S., Sweden, the transatlantic community, and indeed the entire world to work together to accelerate the energy transition. Although some of the threats we face today are unprecedented in nature, free peoples can overcome these challenges. The U.S.-Sweden partnership is strong, deep, and rooted in history, and together we can use technology and human ingenuity to mitigate climate change and deliver freedom and prosperity for ourselves and for others. I'm proud to be building upon this spirit of partnership through our collaboration with the Swedish Energy Agency, Business Sweden, and the Green Transition Initiative to rationally accelerate the deployment of critical decarbonization technologies. Now, before I conclude, I want to thank one last time Deputy Prime Minister Bush, Ambassador Aline, Executive Director Andren, and the whole team at the Swedish Embassy for your leadership in advancing transatlantic climate change solutions and for your graciousness in hosting us today. Let's use today to do the work needed to mitigate climate change and ensure that we steward a safe and livable planet, not only for ourselves, but for those who follow us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And talking about opportunistic adaptation, and I think this was a very nice jump in from Reed Blakemore to do the speech that was planned for Fred Kemp. But now we are transitioned to the first panel, and it is about strategies and tools for the transition of cities. And I welcome to the stage Maya Sparkman, Assistant Director, Global Energy Center, Atlantic Council, as our first moderator. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll let my panelists settle in first. Perfect. Well, hello and welcome. My name is Maya Sparkman. I am an Assistant Director at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, and it is my privilege to be moderating today's panels to discuss strategies and tools to decarbonize cities. And I have an expert panel here to discuss this very topic. Before diving into our discussion, I'd like to extend my thanks to Ambassador Aline, Deputy Prime Minister Bush, and Reed Blakemore for their remarks. Their words set the stage for today's summit, highlighting the progress made since the launch of the Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative, but have also underscored the urgency of raising ambitions and taking tangible actions towards a net zero future. While much of the climate and energy system decarbonization discussions have centered around national level policies and targets, cities have emerged as leaders in implementing policies, engaging with local communities, and crafting innovative strategies to reduce their carbon footprint. Importantly, cities have played a pivotal role in identifying opportunities that align economic growth within the context of the clean energy transition. The UN estimates that cities consume over 3/4 of the world's energy and are responsible for more than half of global greenhouse gas emissions. With urban populations poised to grow, cities must simultaneously expand and transform their energy systems, mobility, infrastructure, and societal habits. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today. We have Peter Engelke, the Deputy Director of Foresight at the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center and non-resident Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. We have Lars Johansson, who is the Coordinator for Climate Neutral Cities 2030 with Viable Cities. And then we have Ryan Freed, who's the Climate Action Officer of the great city of Alexandria, even though I live in DC, so, but I know that it's great. Okay, so Peter, I want to start with you first to kind of explain from your vantage point, what is the role of cities in achieving the broader global decarbonization agenda? And I know through your research, you've engaged with a lot of different cities around the world, and so I was wondering if you could highlight or shed some light on the opportunities and challenges that you've found to be common between these cities.
Sure, great. So thank you, Maya, and so nice to see everybody here. And I want to echo Reed's sentiments that it's always wonderful to come to the House of Sweden. We do a lot of work with our friends across the pond, and this is another instance, I think, of really valuable cooperation with the government of Sweden. So yeah, so my name is Peter Engelke. I run the Foresight shop at the Atlantic Council, as well as being a non-resident fellow in the Energy Center specifically. And so I work on all kinds of things, but one of those areas is cities and urbanization. So we do a lot of work in sort of global trends and global, what we call trends and uncertainties. And in the trend side, the urbanization story is absolutely central to everything that's happening in the world that we live in, including in the climate and energy space. And I think it's worth taking a moment to pause and reflect a little bit on the moment in actually human history, not just contemporary history, but all of human history that we're in at the moment. So global urbanization is truly a mass phenomenon that's been going on for about 2 centuries, where it's still going on, as you said in your opening statement. We're living through a process right now that will add collectively billions of more human beings to the world's cities. This is not a trivial matter. This is central to our existence as a species and actually central to everything else that occurs in the world, whether we're talking about climate change and environment, whether we're talking about security, hard security questions and geopolitics, whether we're talking about demographic futures, whether we're talking about the global economy. So this conversation that we're having today on this one particular topic is an example of the centrality of I think, of this issue. You implied, or you said, I think, that cities are where most of the world's emissions occur, and that's true. So something like 70 or north of 70% of all emissions occur in cities, and there's a reason for that. That's because more than 60% of all human beings live in cities, with the percentage rising all the time. Having said that, north of 80% of all of global GDP is produced in cities. So the small answer to your question on sort of cities and a broader decarbonization agenda is that, you know, cities are where the problems are. In other words, it's where the emissions occur, but it's also where the solutions are to be found. So I think that's the first answer. The good news here, and we heard this from earlier speakers, is that cities are both innovative, always have been since they were founded thousands of years ago. It's where innovation occurs for a variety of very, very good theoretical reasons. And they're also mostly, not always, but mostly democratic in spirit. And so that's where community happens and where decisions can be made, if you will, collectively. So you asked a question about sort of what the challenges and opportunities that I've found in my research. I'd like to maybe caveat that answer by saying that there are thousands of cities in the world, and they come in all shapes and sizes and colors. And they have different footprints, very different footprints in terms of scale, so how big they are, how small they are, but also in terms of their socioeconomic, demographic, and other profiles. So you've got cities that are booming very, very fast, for example, in the global south, in the so-called megacities, and many other intermediate-sized cities that face certain types of challenges. And you have cities, so-called Rust Belt cities here in the States, and elsewhere in the global north that maybe are shrinking in population, and every shade in between. So there isn't a single answer to the question, what can you do to, if you will, solve an emission problem in a city, generically speaking. I would characterize it more as a cookbook, wherein you've got a lot of recipes to the answer. There's quite a bit of commonality, maybe in some of the ingredients with the recipes, but they all sort of fit inside of a larger cookbook. I'd like to, I think, focus my remarks less on sort of the technical solutions and more on really process-oriented solutions. I mentioned before that cities are mostly, not always, but mostly democratic in spirit. I'm happy to talk about that a bit more later if we get to it, but as a result of that, stakeholder-driven processes combined with visionary leadership at local level is what I see in common if you're talking about cities that take a decarbonization agenda seriously. And in the work that we've done at the Atlantic Council, excuse me, substantiates that twinned proposition that on the one hand you have local, usually, not always, elected leadership, local private and philanthropic sector leadership, but also an engaged civil society, so NGOs, nonprofits, et cetera. And if you can bring all of those stakeholders together and around a common vision that is bought into by all those different stakeholders, you will get progress. And we've seen that consistently in the cities that we've studied.
Great, thanks so much, Peter. And you teed off Lars perfectly, because when we're talking about collective action, I want to turn to you now, Lars. Can you share a little bit more about Climate Neutral Cities 2030? I don't know how well the audience is familiar with this commitment and this compact that you're supporting in Sweden, and share some of the successful approaches that you've seen these cities that are part of Climate Neutral Cities 2030 take on. Are you still working on doing your slides?
I think I can sit here.
Okay.
I think,
well, you might see slides, you might not.
Yeah. Thank you, Maya. I'm really grateful to this opportunity for dialogue and accelerated learning on the green transition of cities. What we basically work with at Viable Cities, I will come to that who we are in a bit is we want to empower our mutual efforts to create green and climate neutral cities with a good life for all within the planetary boundaries. And that phrase is actually our mission that we're working with. And in Sweden and Europe, we are mobilizing around this mission on the Climate Neutral Cities 2030. It's a mission-oriented approach, and we actually borrowed it from the US. It's based on the work you did when you put the man on the moon several decades ago. A clear, target, mobilizing broadly with stakeholders in society. So we're doing our moonshot, but on the climate. And maybe we can inspire you a little bit back as well. Why are we working with cities? Because cities account for most of the emissions. It varies between 70 and 80% if you account for the consumption and all the transports and such. It's also a transition that's really important for all countries. And what we want to do, and our role is to contribute by we collect experience from Swedish cities and try to share that with the rest of the world. But we are also very inspired by listening and engaging with cities in, for example, United States. And our main ambition is to accelerate and contribute to a faster climate transition. But the basics for who we are is that Viable Cities is one of Sweden's 17 strategic innovation programs. We were founded in 2018. We are basing our methodology on this mission approach. And our funding governance or agencies, national agencies, is the Energy Agency, Formas, and Vinnova. And we have an investment budget during our period that we work as a program until 2030 of 100 million euro. And we focus, as I said before, on climate neutral cities. And we work closely together with 23 cities in Sweden who has kind of committed to be front runners and committed to take some risks in their exploration of what we need to do, what kind of measures. And they have also committed that they want to spread the knowledge and their learnings to other cities. And our main tool of doing this is something we call a climate city contract. And it's a policy innovation that we started out with in 2019 with 9 cities and 3 national agencies. And now we work with the 23 cities and 6 national agencies. It's a new form of cooperation where we kind of asked the 23 mayors in these cities, together with the 6 director generals of the national agencies, to sign a contract every year about their repository measures to accelerate the green transition. And this has kind of created a safe space or an arena where they can together explore what we need to do more. So rather than throwing demands at each other, they're actually now embarking on a transition journey together. And as an example in this contract, which is not legal, it's all about setting the mandate and being have to focus on the soft power and creating a mandate for change, is that the national level focus on how can they improve regulation, funding. The cities focus on how can they work with the green transition in their local context, and that's defined not only by the the municipality organization. It's the city geography. So it's about the business, it's about the citizens, it's about the academia, it's about the public workers, it's everyone. So they devise a portfolio for climate transition, and this portfolio is then supported by the national level and the learning that we provide between the cities. And the contract consists of the climate goals, a climate action plan, and also a climate investment plan. So it creates a directionality for this climate transition portfolio, but it also needs to find the investments on how to do this transition. And it's not only about the cities' investments, it's about all the investments, because approximately only 15% of the investments in a city geography is from the public funds in Sweden. So they need to kind of cooperate with all the other stakeholders and get them on the same kind of local transition journey. Since I told you it's a process rather than a document, so every year we gather everyone and they sign this contract, revised version, and when they do that, it really kind of creates a space for the transition teams we're working with in the cities, other change leaders for the green transition, to work even more with these issues. And as I told you, we started with this in Sweden. It has now spread to the European level, and we work with 100 cities within the European Mission for Climate Neutral and Smart Cities. And also, we have started to work to the global level. So I think this initiative, the Green Transition Initiative and Summit, is really a good starting point to take the step to make this work with a mission of climate neutral cities to a global one.
Great, thanks so much, Lars. And now we'll turn it over to you, Ryan. So we've heard from Peter about the global importance and relevance of the actions taken by cities, from Lars about the effectiveness of this, fostering this, this network of cities to be able to leverage action and change. And so now, looking into the city level, can you share how the city of Alexandria is innovating around the decarbonization agenda and the climate action plan, and where you see the greatest opportunities and chances for greater areas of collaboration as well?
Yeah, so I think one of the important things to think about with cities is we see the people we impact every day. Right, that is the thing about working in cities. I've worked at the national, at the state, and at the city level, and every day we see the impact of what the work is that we're doing. We see the people who need help. We see the people who are happy with us. We hear from the people who are angry with us. It happens when we're at the grocery store, when I'm mowing my yard, when I'm walking my dog. We see the people that we're impacting all the time, and it means that we have to be responsive to what's going on out there. So I think that's one of the important things about city work is the focus that we have can't just be on the big climate picture globally. It has to be on what it means to individual people. So just to borrow something from the Deputy Prime Minister, I think what we're trying to do is focus on that climate hope to take the anxiety out of it, right? We want to talk about climate with people where they're at, so they know that there's an opportunity to move forward. So Alexandrians, as they're out shopping, we want to make sure that they understand there are green, sustainable, climate-friendly choices they can make. So that's working with businesses to make sure that they're taking those actions and then connecting them with consumers who want them to make those actions. So we're creating a sense of using purchases, using people to further the actions that we're asking for. It's also about talking with people about what they need to do in their homes. We don't have to be worried about what the climate is doing. We need to act on the climate. So that means making the choices in our homes. We know there's a lot of construction going on. We know there's a lot of choices being made. We're getting into the heating season, although it's 85 degrees outside right now. We're getting into the heating season, and people are going to make choices about their heating system. Their heater's going to break and they have to make a new choice. And we want to be there to tell them there's a better choice to make than the one you're likely to make. There's one that is better for the environment and there's one that's better for your health. And those are the kinds of things that we want to be out there talking to people about. But then it's also about engaging people who don't have the luxury of making those choices, whether they're renters or they're economically disadvantaged, or they're really just struggling with other things in life and climate isn't at the top of their list of things to care about. Climate is still affecting them dramatically, and it's about having those conversations with them. So we're kicking off a couple of programs, creating climate ambassadors, eco-city ambassadors we call them, to come learn about what the city is doing. What are the programs that we have available in the city of Alexandria, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and through the United States government? What are those programs that we have available, and how can you go help your neighbors take advantage of those programs? So I can't talk to every single person in the city who is eligible for program services and get them to sign up. but the neighborhoods can. And this is about taking that climate message, the think globally, act locally message, and really helping our neighbors do that together. So I think that's really the message that cities need to take, is understand that the climate work that we're doing isn't about the number of greenhouse gas emissions reductions that we can brag about in our end-of-year plan. That is important, and it's something that we all do, but it's not what really matters. What matters is the number of people the fewer people that went to the hospital because of a heat-related climate emergency, the number of people who didn't have their electricity shut off because they couldn't afford it. Those are the metrics that matter to the city. Those are the metrics that matter to the people in the city. So I think that's the important thing that cities have to focus on, and we get there by having direct conversations with the people that we're working for, and we're working with. So I think that's the attitude that cities are starting to take and have to take in order to be successful in this.
Great, thanks so much for sharing. And Peter, I'll come back to you. So a common theme throughout all of your remarks has been the need to engage with the communities and educate communities so that they know how they can benefit from this transition, but also how they're being impacted by the transition. So Peter, I want to take it up to more of the national and federal level, and how, hearing what Lars and what Ryan were saying, how can national and federal level policies kind of enable these cities to influence this change and work better within their cities?
So what national and governments and multilateral organizations ought to be thinking about is that cities really are both where much of the climate challenge lies, and therefore you need to find solutions in cities. But at the same time, you need to be embracing them because they're your solution set, and treating them as such both at domestic level and at international level, right? So if you're thinking ahead, for example, to COP28, it's promising to see that there's a local action summit that is going to be occurring later this fall, which is really the first time, to my understanding, that this is happening at a COP. And that's a very good thing, because what it is saying is that for many years, local governments and associations of city governments have been pushing for this kind of an outcome at international level, within the UNFCCC. And this is the first time really there's a formalization of those efforts at international level. And I think that what that represents is that both from the bottom up, in terms of local governments pushing really on the door to have their concerns in the climate space taken more seriously by national governments, as well as from the top down, meaning at the national level and within the UN itself, a recognition of the validity of those concerns. You're seeing this kind of slight crack in the door being opened. It was opened a little bit in 2015 in Paris, with the sort of side events that were occurring, that were largely courtesy of the mayor of Paris at the time, and other big city mayors that were convening cities around the question of cities as being leaders in finding climate solutions within the UNFCCC context. But that wasn't so much as formalized as this one is happening in later this fall in the UAE. And so I see that as progress and an example of how local governments and their concerns have voice and within the international system, which of course is still dominated by national level governments. I've written quite a bit about sort of the global governance architecture and how that's evolving as non-state actors are becoming more influential within the interstate system, or I should say as an addendum to the interstate system. And I think this is a good example of where there is progress wherein cities are having increasing voice.
Great, thanks so much, Peter. And I think building off of that, Lars and Ryan, Lars, I'll turn to you first, but you're building this coalition of cities to be able to attract more businesses and advocate for aligned policies and investments. And so how do you see this sort of model? You've said it's being replicated in the EU. How do you see this model being replicated elsewhere in the world, or in the US, or working with a city like Alexandria? Do you see feasibility in that? And if so, where are the greatest opportunities to create this coalition of cities that are working towards this greater goal that kind of impacts their cities directly?
Yeah, I think one important learning is that when we embark on this kind of system change journeys that the green transition is, we really need to get our levels in the multi-level governance system together. And one of the most beneficial things about the Climate City contract as a being that we're getting the national level together with the local level to see how they can support the green transition. But then also on the local level, the cities have started to replicate this method with the local business, the local civil society, and they kind of get their stakeholders or their context to on board on this mission of climate neutral cities. And we actually creates a chain between the different levers that have some sort of directionality. And how this can unfold from a business perspective is could be like the case in Örebro in Sweden, where a property developer work with a system pilot on energy efficiency. They invest money into this, 200 million Swedish kronas. But when the municipality in the same time have their climate action plan set, or the strategy or the direction for all of this work towards climate neutral cities, the market sees that this is a working portfolio. So this investment immediately affects the property value, which goes up with 2 billion Swedish kronas. So having this sense of kind of holistic thinking on this and working together, you can actually kind of strengthen each other and create a business case where the climate transition isn't about the things will cost you, but it's kind of sound economic investments.
And Ryan, what about from your point of view, how is Alexandria working with other cities, whether it's in Virginia or elsewhere in the US or elsewhere around the world, and how has that benefited the economic growth within the city as well as kind of advance their opportunities to achieve their climate goals?
Yeah, I think the important thing to think about is cities have often stayed away from a bigger picture, a bigger conversation about how to change policy, how to affect policy at the state level or at the federal level. It's hard to do and it's expensive to do, so cities have typically shied away from that. And I think now is the time when we have to start taking more action and being more involved in that. So cities are passing policies that require electrification, that move vehicles to electrification, and that's dramatically going to affect what happens with the utility structure, how we get our electricity, where electricity comes from, and the stability of our grid. Those things aren't being considered at the Regulatory Commission as much as they should, and cities have to be the ones to start forcing that conversation to happen. And it's expensive, and it's time-consuming, and it's complicated, and it's all of those things on purpose, so it's harder to involve yourself in. But cities have to overcome that and start involving. And I think the message here is to remember that cities are people, right? Cities are not just these incorporated entities, they're people. People make up the cities. You are your city. And I think it's important to see the power of the people to do things. If you hop on the water taxi and you go down to Old Town, which I really recommend, you'll go by a former coal plant. 10 years ago, there was a coal plant that would have been spewing toxic chemicals into the air in Alexandria along the Potomac. Alexandrians came together and shut it down, and now in the next 5 years it's going to be a beautiful, sustainable community with where you can live, work, play, shop, eat, all sorts of things. But it's going to be a highly sustainable development because of the work of Alexandrians to shut that down. And that was, of course, partnership with the city to make sure that happens and private sector development to make sure that happens, but it was driven by people. So I think the way we work together as cities is to keep empowering our citizens to take action and to do things and remind them that we can't do it. I can't do my job as a climate action officer unless I have a whole bunch of people behind me saying this is important to me, because I'm just one voice in front of the city and I need 156,000 people that can say this is something we care about in order for that to happen. So I think working together is absolutely key, but our job is to educate the citizens in our community so they give us the power, so they give us the authority to take the next steps. I think that's really the thing that we have to keep in mind that is so hard to do for cities, and those of those organizations that are out there helping cities have to focus their efforts on that part of what cities need.
And I think touching upon how this transition is impacting the people within the cities, and that's where you see the greatest impact when there is a coal community that's going to have to transition, then there's pushback from the community because they don't want to be left behind in the transition. So I'm wondering if you could touch on a little bit about how the city is tackling the workforce development challenge, whether it's with this example that you shared of whenever they closed down that coal mine. I'm assuming it was a while ago. But yeah, like what does that look like within the city of Alexandria? And then I'll turn to you, Lars, on how you guys are tackling workforce development within this collection of cities in Sweden.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're working on is in partnership with Virginia Tech, the university, with some of the local community colleges and then some of the local trades folks, is finding trades training that focuses specifically on high performance building design. So we have a lot of engineers and architects and others who are out there who have a lot of training and a lot of opportunities to learn about energy efficiency and high building performance. That's great, but the people who are swinging the hammers, the people who are laying the conduit, the people who are connecting the pipes, there aren't specific trainings for them. And we're working to help build that out. We're hopeful we'll get a grant from the US Department of Energy to do some of this work, but providing specific trainings for those contractors. There's a shortage all across the country for construction workers, for electricians, for HVAC providers. There's just a shortage out there. So there's a huge opportunity for good, high-paying jobs, but we need to make sure that we're not filling that with just an influx of the old thinking of how to do those jobs. It has to be done in a better way. So we're trying to fill that gap. That gap is big right now, and it's gonna get bigger. So we're trying to fill that gap with high-quality training, so people who are transitioning into that workforce now know that they can market themselves as green providers of this work. They'll be able to command higher pay, they'll be able to get more jobs, and they'll be helping us as the leaders in the transition. So the transition, again, it's not the city that's going to lead the transition. It's the people that are doing the work, the people who are swinging the hammers. They're going to do the work of the green transition, and that's what the city is trying to really focus on, is working with that group of people.
And for those listening who are looking for a job, you know where to start looking. And Lars, over to you.
Yeah. Within our group of cities, our cohort of 23 cities in Sweden, what we're kind of focusing on right now when it comes to the engagement of the citizens is to move beyond opinions to recommendations, because quite frankly, you know, talking about the green transition and the climate transition, it can be quite polarizing, even in the local context. And the polarization often comes from that we're just talking or having our conservation built on different opinions. So what we're doing now is we're setting up several learning cases within several of the cities we work with, working with more of a deliberative, democratic ways of working with the citizens. So instead, so one example would be that we would, in one city, we will arrange a citizen panel, random selected citizens who over a period of time will get the same kind of decision support as the politicians get, and then they will give back the recommendations. And these recommendations can, you know, we can do it on an issue that is fairly, you know, politically complicated, and then, you know, recommendations is something much heavier than opinions, and it will probably, you know, help the transition to move onwards. We're doing this in Sweden. It's sort of a copy and paste from other countries who's done this work a lot more before. Like France, they did this on a national level. The recommendation was to stop, you know, the short flights and just go by train. The recommendations from the citizens was that, and then it was perfectly fine for the president and the political decision makers on the national level to say yes, we'll do it, because the cost for them politically had then decreased. So I think that's a method of change on the system level that we can use, and that's, you know, comes back to everything that we're trying to do with the cities. It comes back to system change or change management on a system level, and you know, the ways we talk with citizens and include them in the processes is just one of the things in that toolbox.
Thanks for sharing. So we are getting close to time now. I don't know where all that time went, but I wanted to give you guys each a quick minute to say your key message to drive this conversation home. Peter, I can start with you.
Right. Well, I guess my key message would be not afraid. That would be my key message to local leaders. The future is a decarbonized one, and cities are where the solutions are going to be found, as Secretary General Guterres has said. And I think that's literally true. It's also sort of metaphorically true as well. By be not afraid, what I mean by that is, I think Ryan's points about, this is yes, it's a decarbonization story, but it's also a social one, it's an economic one, and it's even a political one. All those things come together in cities because they're tiny little democracies and they have to function well in order to function at all. In other words, people have to get along with one another, whether they're bothering you at the grocery store or not. And as a result of that, I think that we can find the future that we want in cities if they're willing to be bold in what they aim to do. And I would say that those cities that don't choose that path are the ones that are going to fall behind, because the future is not just a decarbonized one from the standpoint of all the good things that we want ecologically and in terms of public health, those kinds of outcomes. But economically, that's where the future is. And the cities that lead in innovating around in those spaces are going to be the economic leaders, and they're the ones who are going to win in the end.
Lars, over to you.
Yeah, I think we need to realize that we live in a different age now, which is it's identified by we have multiple crises, or polycrisis, or permacrisis. It's the energy, it's the war, it's the inequality, it can be pandemics, and all of those things. And when we work with the climate transition or green transition, when we're going to kind of work with that, we also need to find solutions that have multiple benefits, multiple co-benefits, and that can be quite hard and complicated. And the recipe for that would be to kind of get the multi-level governance together, create these arenas where we can come together as different kind of stakeholders on the city level, but also like vertically up to the national and European and global level, to figure out how can we work with these solutions. Because the solutions are then most often not owned by only one stakeholder. So we really need to cooperate to meet this age of crisis.
And Ryan, over to you.
I would just say, if you think your city needs to do more, tell them, work with them, give them the power, authority, the excuse to do more. If anyone remembers the Captain Planet cartoon from a long time ago, the power is yours, I think that's really important to embrace and to kind of grasp onto. I can't do my job unless people are telling us this is what they care about. This is a democracy. This is like, my power is derived from the people that stop me in the grocery store and talk to me about what we need to work on. So talk to your city, talk to your legislators, talk to people, and then take the next steps. If you know there are choices you can make them, but you have to keep talking about it, because the message continually being repeated is what gives us the ability to go out there and do this work. Otherwise, it gets lost in the message of lots of things that cities have to care about. We have to care about a lot of things. And this has to be something that is at the top of the list, but it's only there if you're out there saying it. So be loud, be consistent, because that's what your sustainability folks in your cities, that's what they are wanting. That's what they need, is you.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And we are at time, unfortunately. So thank you, Peter, Lars, and Ryan, for joining today's discussion. And I'm sure you can catch them out there in the coffee break if you have other questions about their work. And then I wanted to thank all those involved and who organized the summit, as well as who supported the summit. So the Green Transition Initiative, the Embassy of Sweden, the NOVA, Swedish Energy Agency, Business Sweden, Volvo, and Atlas Copco. So thank you all so much. We will have a short coffee break, but I've been asked to tell you all to return to your seats in the next 15 minutes, so emphasis on short coffee break. And then the next panel will start to discuss the greening of the construction industry. Thanks so much.
Ja, okej. Det blir bra det.
Men du får stå där och jag hänger. Okay, please take your seats. So now it's time for us to listen to how we can move construction industry forward to a more green construction industry, and we will listen to different examples around that. And for this section, we have a new moderator, Marcus Rundgren-Lu from GTI.
Great. Well, thank you, Linda. Well, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, welcome back to this second session. I hope you had a nice coffee break. Your presence here today underscores the importance of our collective commitment to sustainable practices and global environmental stewardship. So thank you for joining us today as we embark on a journey from the challenges of today to the solutions of tomorrow in the realm of sustainable construction. In today's world, carbon emissions from construction sites are a pressing concern. The construction industry contributes to a significant portion of global carbon emissions, impacting our environment and climate. But the good news is that tomorrow holds the promise of transformative change. We are witnessing a paradigm shift towards more sustainable practices in construction. Tomorrow's solutions involve embracing advanced building processes and innovative materials. Prefabricated housing modules are at the forefront of the revolution, offering efficiency, reduced waste, and improved sustainability. In addition, the machinery powering our construction sites is evolving. Tomorrow, we'll see a rise in zero-emission constructive machines, reducing the carbon footprint of our projects. So as we delve into today's discussion, let's keep in mind the urgency of our mission by addressing today's carbon emission challenges and embracing tomorrow's solutions. We can build a more sustainable and eco-friendly future. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Helena Lidelöv, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Volumetric Building Company, a trailblazer in sustainable construction through innovative prefabricated housing modules. So the floor is yours, Helena.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here, and good afternoon. I hope that your cinnamon bun was really nice, and it reminds me of Sweden, that we actually keep track of the fika tradition. It's really important. Now, industrialized construction is not a new idea in any sense. This has been around for 100 years or so. So I'm going to speak a little bit about VBC and what we do, and give you some KPIs, which could be enticing for the future. So on your lower left, you will have a picture of a factory. That's our factory in California, where we produce modules. These are for multi-family, so we build 4 or 5 stories over a podium. We house people in apartments in here, and these apartments then become available to the market that very, very dearly needs it. California alone has 1 million dwellings that we need, and we also need to produce them sustainably. So inside the facility, we have infused automation, and that is to provide precision, but also to reduce waste. Control environment and providing people on the countryside with work. And then we produce buildings like the one on your lower right, which sits in Philadelphia. So if you take the train, which I will do tonight, up to Philly, you can visit 510 Broad Street, and you can see the largest modular development ever created on the East Coast, and that was made by VBC. So why work with this now, and why is this a piece of the puzzle here when we talk about US and Sweden transition? Sweden is extremely good at this. This is an industry that Sweden knows. We have over 75 factories in our small country alone. And here in the US, I have a little north of 100. So we have a very strong industry tradition and knowledge, which is why when I transitioned over last year, I brought Swedish machines into the facility. So when we are here discussing about this exchange, we already did it last year, and it works. So that's super great. The other portion that I want to bring to the table here are the KPIs you see on your upper left. So using this method, half of the waste compared to normal American construction. 67% less carbon footprint compared to normal American construction. And 90% less transportation to site, which means that if you build in urban areas, your accessibility to site is greatly increased and you leave less disturbance for the people there. So, I mean, this is a method that only penetrates 3 to 5% of the American market right now. And I think there is a good chance that Swedish companies and people and anyone who would like could contribute to this being more widespread and a larger knowledge share. And I haven't even touched on the subjects that we've talked about this morning when we discussed infusing battery technologies and we discussed infusing smart transportation. So I have more to do in this area. I really appreciate working in this industry, and I really appreciate being here today. So without further ado, I would like to thank you for listening, and I would enjoy chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helena. And our next speaker is Dr. Ray Gallin from Volvo Construction Equipment. He holds the position as Vice President of Product Management and Productivity at Volvo Construction Equipment. And you have a very strong track record within both heavy equipment, machinery, and business. So please help me welcome up Dr. Ray Gallin.
Thank you. So thank you very much for hosting us, running this summit. It's a great idea. It's a great chance to get together and network. I know we all appreciate it as presenters, speakers, and people working in the industry. And it gives us a chance to see just how broad the interest is in the things that we're doing and the things that we have to do as society. One of the things that I often start my presentations with is kind of setting a baseline for what we mean when we say sustainability or green technologies. Because if there's 100 people in this room, I guarantee you there's 120 opinions about what that means. So I like to use this framework as the basis for what we're talking about. Because of the fact that this framework, if we balance those three sets of needs, the social needs, the environmental needs, and the economic needs, then we'll come out with a balanced equation that more or less meets the needs that everyone's bringing forward. So whether you're concerned about job, training, economic factors of whether these are affordable, how do I get payback, social factors about the pollution, it's all covered in this framework. And the important thing about that is it forces us to always balance the considerations. So we can't afford to take a look at only the environmental issues because we'll come up with solutions that nobody can afford to implement. Or we can't pay attention to only the social issues because then the environment will suffer because of it. So it is very much, the transition is very much balancing these initiatives, these needs. If you look at the solutions that we're proposing going forward, it's not only battery electric or electrification. Electrification is an important part of it. But there are a number of different solutions that we and other companies are working on that are going to be part of the solution. Again, as I said, we can't satisfy only one need and ignore the others. Same thing goes with the solutions. many of these solutions are going to be the only ones suitable for certain applications. And we have to keep that in mind as we're going forward. So very quickly going through, battery electric, you're all familiar with. Those are out on the market now, starting to appear. Certainly in the automotive industry, they've been around for 15 years. So we're familiar with them. We can go grid connected, which means you basically hook a machine to the grid and run it off grid power. You can go hybrid, which is a diesel engine or some other fuel source engine, drives an electric generator, charges your batteries, runs it that way. We can go alternate fuels. So a lot of people don't like this because they're not necessarily zero emission. But the fact is that we need to make a transition, and there's millions of pieces of equipment out there that we can't afford to ignore, that are older pieces of equipment. They're 10, 15 years old, still in their lifespan, but may be operating under Tier 1 conditions. So if we can get renewable diesels, biodiesels into those, clean them up, that's an important step forward. And finally, there's a lot of talk about hydrogen being the source of the future, especially for very, very high-powered applications. And underlying all of it, we have to get much, much smarter with the energy management on our construction sites and our sites in general. Basically, we have to produce more using less energy than we've come to do with diesel. So if you look at those 5 technologies or 6 technology sets and think about where they're likely to appear, we like to look at it in 2 dimensions. On the left hand of the graph is your power requirement to do the particular application. On the bottom axis is your hours per day that it's got to run. And if you take a look at the very small machines, and by small I mean basically under 100 horsepower, and low duty cycles, that can be run with a 48-volt battery quite easily. And we've got one of those machines sitting outside in the parking lot today that you can look at. You get into the larger machines, you're going up to a 600-volt battery. Common misconception is that you need 600 volts for more energy density. It's actually not true. You need it for faster recharge times, or less recharge time, I should say. Then, if you get above those power levels or those duty cycles, generally we're going to look at alternate fuels, grid-connected machines, and then when you get into the very high power ranges, including long-haul trucking, we're probably going to look at hydrogen technologies, either hydrogen fuel cells or hydrogen internal combustion engines. And underlying all of it, as I said, is the energy management piece. So there are a lot of new technologies, there are a lot of new things coming. There's a huge training curve that we have to have for our workforces and to go forward to keep that balance in society. But if you look at the future, it's quite bright for these technologies.
In crisis, or rather humans are in crisis. The planet will do very well, thank you, without us.
Oh, the Eden project encompasses so much. It's hard to say it's this one thing.
Is a system, is kind of understanding that system and promulgating the idea that we live in a system, that we're all interconnected. There's lots of interconnecting parts, and they all pull on each other. You can't destroy one part and not expect the other bits to be not affected, sort of thing.
We are an attitude, a state of mind, a belief that the future still remains ours to make, and that actually by gathering a lot of clever people together with the right atmosphere, we can actually make the future feel exciting.
It might inspire someone to make a difference. That's great. This is what it's about, right? This is what it's about, yeah?
We sit in a clay pit that used to be a mining center. And now what we have is this beautiful garden.
We are smart people, and we always have to improve everything. And this is another improvement, going from fossil fuels to electric fuels, absorbing then the electrics by PVs, going into the machines. We become circular, and these machines are part of going circular. So that is a pursuit to a better world, to less carbon, better control of everything. And that's what we all aim for with our intelligence, I would say.
The single message that Eden would like to send out is that most humans mean to do the right thing. And by demonstrating that the future still remains a very positive place by the actions that we take, we can excite ourselves into behaving differently.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome up on stage Martin Bermeiren, who currently serves as the product manager, marketing manager for sustainability and digitalization at Atlas Copco. And this, of course, position sets Martin at the very forefront in driving innovation and sustainability.
Thank you. Thank you, and good to be here. It's powerful to hear all these people who want to move, who wants to create a change. So first of all, let me introduce Atlas Copco. And probably some of you know Atlas Copco already, and most of the times from these yellow machines. But Atlas Copco is much more than these yellow machines. We are already 150 years in business. Initially started as a company who created infrastructure for railways in Sweden. And we transitioned through a lot of moves and technologies. For example, we were at a certain moment of time also a manufacturer of diesel engines, but we already left that path 80 years ago because we didn't saw a future into it. So it's to show that Atlas Copco already have a good vision on where we need to be in the future. So just to give some numbers on the Atlas Copco group, we are a global industrial leader active in a lot of segments in the industry, in general industry. So we're involved in, for example, microelectronics, probably a component in your smartphone is being touched by an Atlas Copco product. We're also delivering breathing air in hospitals. We are delivering solutions to the energy industry. We are involved in the making of solar panels, for example, but also in the installation of it. So we are a very broad group, active in a lot of industries. We are active in 180 countries and more. And we have, for the moment, it always goes up and down because we're doing acquisitions and divestments, but we're around 49,000 employees globally. And of course, we are, our headquarters is based in Stockholm in Sweden. Yeah, the button works. So we are moving to a more sustainable future. And what does it mean for us? It's that we really want to empower the transition and accelerate the transition. And because we also don't want to leave it to empty words, we submitted ourselves or our targets to the Science-Based Initiative. Because we truly believe that moving our customers in more sustainable solutions, we also need to take the lead in this transformation. So therefore, we're very happy that we established our baseline and we have submit a full set of actions to this initiative. Coming back to the familiar yellow trailers that you see on the road, probably known from construction and road construction. We have a vision in our portable air division, and it's to deliver the most sustainable solution for every tough application. So we want to be there where others stop operating. For example, this is a very nice image of a tunnel construction site in India, for example, where they already decided to go full electric. So it's not a question about Europe or US, it's a global issue, and we see that more and more countries are taking up initiatives to move into these directions. So, and I think we want accomplishing our mission. It's like the vision is, we want to deliver for our customers a solution for every tough application. It needs to be operating in the most tough conditions, like the Nevada desert. We want to keep our machines going, but also in the Nordic cold, in Sweden, for example, or in the mountain areas in the Himalaya. So therefore, we design and push our components up to the limits. In every industry, it's quite straightforward. We are active in construction, but we are also moving into other industries in order to move and to accelerate the transition into low carbon solutions. And then, of course, the most sustainable one, we have a clear roadmap where we still keep investing in our diesel units because we want to increase the efficiency of those ones. So if you lower the fuel consumption, you also lower the emissions. And also, like Volvo explained, we have a clear roadmap to go to electric, battery electric, and hydrogen solutions. So really happy to be here and being part of this panel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Please join me or join us up here on stage. Well, I may be a little bit biased, but I think that this is the most interesting panel as you are all representing organizations that actually drive change. You have products or services that are driving the market and driving change within our society. I would like to invite the audience to ask your questions as well, but to get you started, I would like to drop a question that we had a discussion earlier today, but the biggest hurdles. I mean, what is it? What do you see? We all in this room drank the Kool-Aid. We all believe in the change that is needed. But what is those tough arguments that you run into when you're out there in the market trying to drive that transition, that change?
I think, right, for us it's the human nature. Maybe a surprising answer, but it's the pushback to change. So we see, for example, in construction, traditional construction, they are used to work in a certain way, and it's very hard to convince people that there are other ways to be able to do their business. Even without downsides, like moving from diesel to electric, it has a certain set of very unique features and benefits for them, but they still are very traditional and holding back to change into this direction.
So, yeah, human nature, yeah.
I agree with that, obviously. There's a lot of change in mindset that's got to go on, but similar to the cars, what we're hearing quite a bit is basically the range anxiety. So they're nervous about how long the machine battery will last during their day. Can they get their full work day in? Do they have to charge midstream? All those types of questions. That's probably the most often asked thing that we get in our business. The other part that comes up quite often, of course, the price comes up, but besides that, the other thing that comes up quite often is the performance, similar to a diesel. And happily, because of the characteristics of electric, we can actually make these machines perform better than their diesel equivalents, especially when you take into account that they're quieter and they have no emissions. So a job that you were going indoors to work on a building or demolish a building, if that was the case, where today you'd have to vent the exhaust outside, and you've got an echo chamber inside that you're having a lot of noise come at you. These machines can do very quietly, very comfortably, without having to have any kind of exhaust system in the building. So we're finding that applications like that are what are attracting these early adopter customers, where they're finding uses that we may not even ever thought of in terms of development, because they weren't a suitable diesel use for equipment. And that's part of our bias, to learn that these things, these electric drives, because of their characteristics, have a lot of applications that we would have never even considered.
No, I think the stakeholder plethora that I'm facing is one of my hurdles. So having all these different bodies needing to come together and make a decision happen is slowing us down if we really need to address the issues we have. I have to convince the city, the state, the architect, the engineer, the local authorities, all the inspectors, and then at sometimes also the building suppliers that they actually can do this together. So it's a very nice task to attack because it's a teamwork that's needed, but also very challenging at times. And I already drank the Kool-Aid because I want to use their machines. That'll be fun, yeah.
And I also will throw in, because I know you're going to ask, infrastructure, of course, is a big concern with all our customers.
Indeed.
How are they going to charge them? How do they get electricity out to a remote site? All those types of questions.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, you all mentioned, I mean, especially now, Helena, you mentioned the collective collaboration, trying to orientate between different stakeholders who's actually the decision maker. That's something we can second from Green Transition Initiative. We try to initiate pilots with various stakeholders. And when it comes to, for instance, like charging infrastructure or building that in a sustainable way, who is your main stakeholder? Would it be, I mean, who's the buyer? Is it the city, the utility company, or is it the construction company?
Yes.
Yeah.
All of the above. Yeah.
All right. But yeah, and when it comes to the modular housing, I know that we've been talking a little bit prior to this panel about different stakeholders, but through different phases of the lifetime of the building.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it as a product, the product we're making is a little bit strange because it's also real estate. So it has a meaning for people who live there. And the energy consumption during the life of the building is far exceeding what happens during the construction phase. But we can't ignore the construction phase because we're doing it all the time. As an example, later or early next year, we will ship 200 modules down to LA. I would love for us to have a sustainable technology support that because it's a 7-hour drive. That isn't, I'm not happy about the solution I have. So yeah, there are many stakeholders and also many customers to this process, which makes it intricate and very important.
Do we have any questions from the audience? This one over. All right, we'll start over there and then we'll go there. The gentleman in front, and then we'll go over here, and we'll come back. I'm sorry, this is actually my fault. I didn't warn anyone that that I was going to do this. Ask the audience for questions.
Yeah, thank you. Lars Johansson from Bible Cities. I want to give a special kudos to Volvo, actually, because in one of the cities that work with climate contracts, you have together with that city built the first fossil-free kindergarten in the EU. So all the construction was done with this kind of equipment that you showcased. And my question would be, since we are here now in the United States, and also we had talked with Alexandria earlier today, and also that the innovation can also be about copy-pasting something that's working somewhere and putting it in a new context. So how feasible or how should we do to make that kind of kindergarten in Alexandria?
I think that and a number of other small-scale construction projects, we're at the point where we can do them today. And that's the importance of some of these pilot programs that we're running, is to demonstrate that, to prove it, that it can be done today and it can be done economically. So when you get to a larger project, that's still probably a couple of years away, but the small, mid-sized building projects and small utility projects, we can absolutely do them today, and that's part of the pilot that we're designing together with Green Transport Initiative and companies like Atlas Copco.
And I think it's very important for us, like companies, come together and combining our efforts into showcasing that it's possible to come with this kind of solution, that an electrified construction site is viable financially. You can do it in an easy way that the performance of the equipment is the same and convince people. Because now we are investing a lot of time and effort, each on a separate level, in convincing people. And when you combine these efforts, I'm convinced that we can do much more just by showcasing people that it is possible.
And it's part of the education and the culture shift that we need to make. So people need to realize it's possible. If they've never been exposed to it, there's no way they would know that it is out there.
I'd like to chime in there. I mean, I've heard all of you, the three of you, when we've been in discussions prior to this panel, mentioning that the training or education of the clients or the possible clients. Could you just mention a little bit, how do you work with that? How do you do an example of how do you educate your buyer?
We have a lot of tools available already. Like on our website, you can find an easy, straightforward calculator where you can compare our diesel products versus our electric. And then you can see the savings, benefits, especially target on your use case. So you just put in some the running hours that the equipment is running, what kind of fuel you're using. So you come down to the very straightforward answer. But we're also investing a lot of time and effort in showcase our equipment. So a diesel equipment, we receive a question, we quote it, and probably it's been sold or it's going to a competitor in the worst case. But with the electric equipment, we need to challenge the question already. So is this the real equipment that you need? So we are investing a lot of time in just bringing up, hey, the technology is available. What is your application? Because we don't know it from all of our customers. And then you make a business case on that level, on the customer level. But as you understand, probably you need a lot of time to do so.
Yeah. I mean, Helena, the other one, let Helena in first. You mentioned this as well, that you were talking about how further down the life cycle of the building, when it shifts into another ownership, how some of the decisions that you make already when prefabricating the house, how that has spillover effects all the way, of course, down the road. But how do you work with? I mean, that's 2 steps away from you at least.
Yeah, it is, but it also is part of the engagement that you need when you're purchasing or really procuring a building, because it's such a long lifespan, so you have to take care of the entire life cycle. We work a lot with bringing people to visit and see the process, to kind of feel it and understand what it is. There's a large educational piece in it, and that's part of why I also attend these events. You know, the more people who know will be able to ask questions. So, and it's a nice discussion to have, because it's not only giving, it's also when we have visitors, they also have their own opinion, and it strengthens us as a company to get all that feedback. So it's a little bit of for free to get the feedback there too. So I really enjoy doing that part of the work.
And part of the challenge, I think we, as makers and promoters of this type of equipment, we have a broader responsibility to society to go one step further and start educating students coming up in these new technologies and working with vocational schools. So in our case, we're working heavily with AED, the Association of Equipment Distributors, and vocational schools throughout North America to actually help them design programs so their students are not only versed in diesel technologies, but are equally comfortable with electric technologies, even if the equipment isn't widely available yet. We got to prepare them for 4 or 5 years when they get out and start working.
So both short-term and long-term. But when it comes to the more short-term measures, do they work? I mean, the million-dollar question, do you sell more by educating your buyers?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you don't, you won't get the sale. I would say the first half of the sale is probably educating, just talking to them about their needs, how it fits, where the downsides are. That's as important as the advantages, is to talk to them about, here's what you have to look out for.
I think we had one more question in the front, right? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I'll take the power of the microphone. I'd like to push you a little bit on, I'm Charles DeLeva, former World Bank, now American University. I'd like to push you a little bit on sustainability as a concept. Number one, on green hydrogen, we hear that it's more feasible in Africa, but really not that feasible in Europe, North America. And on the rare earth, we heard a lot today about, hopefully, Sweden has its discovery in lithium, but the sustainability, your 3 pillars, when it comes to extracting the rare earths that's necessary for batteries. There's challenges. The sources are often in unstable parts of the world. And when it comes to modular housing, I think, as you quite point out, there's a lot of education yet to form. And I think that, as an American, we're used to very solid European construction. And I don't think people are well educated about modular. How do you make that cultural shift? And when you refer to the carbon footprint, is that a full project life cycle on carbon footprint? Thanks.
Go first, please.
Yeah, as far as sustainability, those 5 solutions that I put out there, none of them are perfect. We run into limitations with battery electric when you get into the power requirements we need to do the job and the duty cycles. Batteries simply won't do it. The physics aren't there to do it with batteries. So we have to look at these other technologies. What you point out is one of the deficiencies with hydrogen is most of our hydrogen right now in this country certainly is not green. Most of it is produced from natural gas. So there's a fossil fuel component in there. There's a pollution component. The rare earth minerals, as Deputy Prime Minister Ebba Busch mentioned, they don't come from the best places in the world as far as we're concerned, and their mining practices in a lot of those places leave a lot to be desired. So there are certainly challenges to go through. So, but as I also said, to me, these technologies, as they develop and mature, will overcome some of those challenges. Those are all challenges that we can recognize, work on, and engineer our way through, if you will, as long as we have faith that this is going to move forward and we make the balance, keep the balance in check as we're moving forward.
Yeah, so on the modular portion then, important distinction between what is known as trailers and what is known as permanent modular. So what we're engaging in is the permanent modular side, where we design to the same building codes as you would for a steel or concrete structure. So it's the longevity of the building is secured through following that building code. So it's more the method than anything else. And then the question was around the methodology used for the life cycle assessment. And we actually, for lack of a framework, used the European framework with all the different stages that are there. So we incorporated the construction phase, but also what happens on site. And most importantly, we incorporated all the transportation that is in modular, because that's one of the largest, most prominent questions I get is that, but you're shipping, you're using trucks all over the place, and that can't be sustainable. But if you look at the entire equation, it actually is, even though I would love to move away from diesels and petrols and go into hydrogen or whatnot is given to me as a good solution, right? Yeah, so thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I think to add on that statement of Ray, we don't, at least in Atlas Copco, we also not believe in one solution fits all. We will keep investing, for example, in diesel technology and make it much more efficient than it is today. On top of that, we are really motivating and pushing our customers on a global level to go to more like HVO fuel or biofuels in order to reduce their overall emissions over there. So it will be an end story. And I think this is very important to point out.
Yeah. We do actually have one more question.
Yep. Rickard Berking, former colleague of Ray, now working with the fuel cells at PowerCell, a Swedish company. So Ray, in 2018, Volvo Construction Equipment made a very bold decision to go electric for the compact machines. That was bold and visionary. What do you what would you like to see from Volvo Construction Equipment today as a bold and visionary next step? Because, I mean, you have the experience, you know what to do. What would you like to see as the decision going forward?
I think from a Volvo Group perspective, the bold step is already out there where our CEO has said that we want to be fossil-free by 2040. So there's a lot of components to that. A lot of things have to happen. But as an ambition, I think that's pretty aggressive compared to what we're seeing worldwide. And remember, we're a global company. So that's a very bold statement to make, and I'm happy to see them make it because it gets the company motivated, moving in that direction as fast as is possible.
Yeah, and I mean, from our side, we're happy to hear that because it, even though with Sweden would lower our sustainability goals, we still see that the industry is taking a leading role in pushing sustainability through all society. But now we have unfortunately run out of time, quite a lot when I'm looking at the watch. But ladies and gentlemen, please help me to a big thank you to our panel.
And now I'm your pause music, because we need mics on the new speakers. So those who have mics, please return them, and those who will enter stage, please get mics. I'll take this opportunity to remind you of when you entered, you might have seen some machines outside. So in the networking reception, if you haven't looked at them, maybe you can convince someone to try them out. I don't know, at least look at them. And now we have also already been into lithium a bit. So I think this last panel really fits into the overall scope because it's about resources for the transition. And so, yeah, I don't know what I should tell you more because they aren't ready yet. Yes, I'll tell you what packages is. I've given away small packages. It's actually future food, so it's sea crackers. And so it's made out of the seaweed, I think it's called. And I think that's an interesting solution into future food. And we were thinking, what should you give away as a gift of appreciation in such an event where there are many speakers that cannot accept gifts? So if it's a small cracker package, I think it's okay. But with that said, now I think I can introduce the next moderator, Maria Brogren, Consular Office of Science, Innovation and Higher Education. I'm happy I had it on paper, at Embassy of Sweden. Welcome.
Thank you, Linda. And while my panelists are getting their mics, I will just give a brief introduction to the topic. And I want you, the panelists, I want you to come up on stage as soon as you are ready with the microphones to sit here next to me. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Last but not least, welcome to this panel in which we're going to discuss the resources that are needed for the green transition. And as Linda said, my name is Maria Brogren, and I'm the Counselor for Science and Innovation here at the Embassy of Sweden to the United States. And I will be moderating this very topical panel, I think. I have a background in science and innovation policy, and that's the reason why I love being here in Washington in the center of everything politics. Please come up and sit on stage. But I've also worked in 10 years with sustainability in the construction, infrastructure, and energy sectors. And the common characteristics of those sectors is a massive usage of materials, from bulk rock and gravel to stainless steel and rare earth elements.
And with the green transition of not only these sectors, but the entire society, some specific materials become critical, as we have heard already today. For example, the ones that are needed in EV batteries and in permanent magnets for electric motors. And the demand of lithium and cobalt and several other minerals is expected to increase manifold in the next decade or so. And at the same time, as we also have heard earlier today, nearly 90% of the production of rare earth elements and 60% of all lithium is processed in China. And the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine and also export restrictions in producing countries have really highlighted how vulnerable our societies and the green transition is to disturbances in the supply chain. And also, as Deputy Prime Minister Bush pointed out, we might, in a couple of years, look back and say that this is the era of critical minerals. So it's really in the center of attention in geopolitics. And this is complicated matters, so I'm happy that I have this distinguished panel here so that we can learn from experts in this field what's going on in geopolitics, in the industrial policy, and also hands-on in practical measures that are taken to decrease these vulnerabilities of the supply chain. And in the panel that will help us to shed light on this, we have Reid Blakemore, who is the Director of Programs and Research at the Atlantic Council. We have Maria Sunér, who is the CEO of SWEMIN, the Swedish Association of Mines, Mineral and Metal Producers. And we have Jeremy Bedin, sorry, I practiced, but I got it wrong anyway. Head of Product Strategy for North America at Volvo Energy. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we will start with short interventions from the panelists, and then I will lead a joint discussion with all three of them. And then, if we have time in the end, I would like to also open it up for some questions from you. So please prepare short questions, and I want just 10 words and a question mark. So first, I'd like to introduce Reid Blakemore, and Reid is, as I said, the Director of Research and Programs at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, where he leads the center's work on energy supply chains and critical minerals, trade and geopolitical risk, and the evolution of bilateral relationships in the energy transition. So it's an excellent combination of expertise that you have for this discussion. So welcome, Reid, and thank you for being here. And I would like to start by asking you to explain to all of us what is critical minerals? Is there a definition of that? And why are they so important for the green transition?
Well, thank you, and I also must commend your assertion to the audience to make their questions questions and not comments. As a fellow think tanker, I appreciate that. The definition as to what a critical mineral is ultimately somewhat in the eye of the beholder, right? We're here today to talk about critical minerals in the context of the energy transition and the new suite of minerals that have emerged as a result of our clean energy technology demands. But critical materials and minerals have been a strategic concern, not just of the United States, but of countries around the world for some time. The first critical minerals list in the United States, for example, was produced in World War I and was limited to nickel, potash, and tin, right? A critical mineral, effectively, is something that is an absolute necessity to secure sufficient supplies of in order to limit the inflationary risks of that material not being able to be accessed effectively, and also limit the dependency on foreign rivals in certain cases to secure those minerals. So when we now take that definition and apply it to what is happening as a result of energy transition and what is the profound economic revolution that is coming as a result of the energy transition, the strategic need for things like lithium, nickel, cobalt, tellurium, rare earth elements. I mean, out of the 50 minerals on the 3 U.S. critical minerals lists, right, nearly the entire periodic table is covered at this point. And that's largely a result of the diversity and dynamism of our mineral demands as a result of energy transition. But when we think about why they are critical because accessing those minerals is a necessary part of building the clean, green economy, and for countries like the United States, for countries like Sweden, Europe, et cetera, they're part of establishing economic leadership in the economy that will feature heavily in 2050 and beyond. And establishing the supply chains which enable those clean energy technologies and seizing that market share for those technologies requires an approach to securing the supply chains, building resilient supply chains around those minerals, which is a challenge in some cases. And this gets to where a lot of the issues around supply chain capacity, supply chain concentration, are some of the very issues that were outlined by Deputy Prime Minister Bush, have been discussed at length here in Washington, and will, frankly speaking, continue to feature heavily in what you have rightly referred to as the age or era of critical mineral resource supply chains.
I want to get into more how we can work with securing the supply chain. But I was just curious when you mentioned that the US has 3 different lists. Why are they? I mean, that seems confusing to have different lists.
Admittedly, it is, right? And I think that's partially because, again, a critical mineral or critical material is in the eye of the beholder and what that particular beholder thinks is critical to achieve its particular goals. So, the critical minerals is produced by the Defense Logistics Agency is primarily focused on things like rare earths or things that are needed for stealth bombing. Antimony is on that list because it's a coating on munitions. And fun fact to the side, if you don't have a particular grade of antimony, it changes the trajectory of a munition that would require, to rethink military doctrine, right? That's what makes a mineral critical for the DLA. For the USGS, it's a little bit more sweeping. It's a little more, it's designed mainly to think about, out of the ecosystem of economic needs that the United States has, what are the minerals that are particularly supply constrained at the moment? For the DOE, and I need to finish up and let our other folks talk. For the DOE, it's energy transition focused. It's about thinking, how do you identify the minerals which are necessary to enable the clean energy deployment goals that are, going to feature heavily over the next 30 years of economic development, both in this country and around the world.
I'm sorry, I got you on a sort of
okay.
sidetrack, but I just want
questions.
you to mention the Critical Minerals Partnership, and what is that?
So, the minerals, the MSP, the minerals,
okay, sorry.
The MSP is an effort, again, when we talk about how you build the resiliency of these mineral supply chains, it is inherently an exercise in partnership building. I don't think anyone on this stage or in Washington or even amongst our partners and allies is under any illusion that you can completely reshore a mineral supply chain upstream all the way down to the consumer that meets the demand that you'll have out to 2050. So you need to think creatively and in a very intentional way about how you build the partnerships with like-minded friends and allies like Sweden, with partners, in these heavily mineral-endowed, resource-rich countries like Chile, like Argentina, like Indonesia. The Mineral Security Partnership is designed to think through how do we finance those projects, how do we build those supply chains in a way which meets both the governance, sustainability, and ultimately the diversified vision for a healthy mineral supply chain ecosystem that we want to have by the time we get to 2050.
Thank you. And now I will turn it over to Maria Stunier of the Swedish Association of Mines, Mineral and Metal Producers. And you represent around 60 companies with more than 13,000 employees in mining, exploration and technology. And you will talk about the potential to increase the production of critical raw materials in the Nordics and do that in a sustainable way as well.
Definitely. And I think I'll stand up because I have a few pictures. I think it's easier so that I can see the pictures here so I know where I am. And just the main message here today is the green transition starts in the mine. Without the products that comes from the mine, we will have no green transition. I think that's pretty clear from what's been said here today. And I think also that we can contribute to do this in a sustainable way. And looking at Sweden, Sweden is actually Europe's mining nation #1. Europe is not a big continent for mining, to be honest. We produce very little, as Deputy Prime Minister Bush said in her inaugurative speech here today. Only 3% of the metals that are mined in the world are mined in Europe. So we are not a big continent when it comes to mining, but Sweden is the main producer of metals in Europe. And what you can see here on these maps is on the first one that is mostly gray, you can see the 12 active mines in Sweden. And 12 might not sound like a lot, but still we produce substantial shares of what's produced in Europe, especially from iron ore, where we produce more than 90%. The next map, the one that is yellow, is the potential that we know about today in Sweden. And here you can see, I'm not asking you to read everything, but the red dots here, for example, are the known deposits of rare earth elements in Sweden. Today, there is no rare earth elements produced in Europe at all, but we know that we have the potential to do this in Sweden. And also, one of the big good things about Sweden as a mining country in Europe is that we also have this mining cluster where we work very closely together on innovation. And these companies that are, I have their logos up here, are just some examples of what we're doing. But for example, Sandvik and Epiroc are really world leading when it comes to mining equipment for underground mining and holds more than 70% of the world market here. So working together with the active mines in Sweden, we know that we can showcase how to do this sustainably. So we have a good potential of getting this through. And we also know that the Nordics in general altogether holds a lot of these critical raw materials that the world is needing. But we are gravely underexplored, I would say. And if you look at Europe as a continent, Europe attracts only 3% of the global investments into exploration today. And you need to explore in order to know what you have in your bedrock, in order to be able to actually start a mine in the future. So that is something that we definitely need more capital to exploration in Europe, and I also would say in Sweden, of course. We also, from the sector in Sweden, have worked together closely on sustainability. Sustainability is at the core of the Swedish industrial tradition. And just to highlight two of these targets, when it comes to climate, our members are dedicated to actually have fossil-free mining operation by 2035 and all the following process steps by 2045. And this is actually happening right now. What we see is happening, and what we also heard in the last panel here, is about the transformation that is going on. We know that the new mines that are going to be started in Sweden and the new developments that our members are doing is actually going to be fully electrified. And I have only 1 minute left. So maybe I'll actually skip what I was going to say about the Critical Raw Material Act. We can take that in the discussion. Just, I don't know if I can back here. Yes. Then I'll say just one more thing. I also think we have been talking a lot about climate today, but I think also one of the weak spots of mining is that we know that we affect the ground where we're on. The biodiversity issue, I think it's really something we also need to address when it comes to the extractive industries. And there is also an area where we work closely together with our members and actually trying to become net positive for biodiversity. And I can talk more about that in the panel. So thank you.
Thank you, Maria. It's very good to hear that we can ramp up production in Sweden. Do you see, you mentioned investments are needed in exploration. Do you see an increased interest in exploration in Sweden?
Yes, I actually would say I do at the moment. We've had a sort of a downgoing trend the last 10 years, I would say, mainly due to the fact that it's so complicated to go all the way from exploration to starting a mine when it comes to the permitting procedures. But now we have a government that is much more positive towards mining, and I think Mrs. Bush here exemplified that. But we also see that the work that the European Union is doing on Critical Raw Material Act, where you actually they want to attract more investments into mining into Europe, together with strengthening the trade relations, of course. But I think that is really showing that we can shift this right now. So it's an upgoing trend at the moment, but it's not enough.
But the policies have shifted towards sort of facilitating more mining.
Yes, it is shifting as we are speaking, I would like to say, because right now the Critical Raw Material Act is negotiated in the European Union, and we also have a lot of things happening in Sweden when it comes to the permitting procedures, where the politicians are still forming the policies. But I think we are on a positive track right now.
Thank you. And now I would like to hand it over to Jeremy Bedin to talk about, well, we have already heard about Volvo here, Volvo Group, and when most of us, when we think about Volvo, I think that we think about trucks and these yellow machines and buses and so, but recently Volvo started a new business area. So please tell us.
So thank you. So Volvo Energy is the newest business area from Volvo Group. And what we really do is help drive and facilitate the transition to total electrification for all 12 business areas within Volvo Group and all of their customers. And so we have two major, you could say two major focus areas. The first, and I think Ray mentioned it, is a key challenge for customers with respect to charging infrastructure. And so Volvo Energy, the first piece of what we are responsible for from a circularity standpoint, looking at every aspect of electrification, is in that first life of the battery, you need to be able to maximize its life. Customers need to be able to have access to charging infrastructure, not just at their depots, but there needs to be essentially a global access to charging infrastructure so that they can run their routes, they can move their vehicles on remote off-grid construction sites, they can keep their equipment running. And so Volvo Energy, a big piece of our business right now, is supporting all of the business areas within Volvo Group to devise those strategies, build the partnerships necessary, and get that technology deployed. The other big piece, and this is really what ties into mineral access and critical resources, is the battery circularity. So managing the total life cycle for the batteries. And we find it impossible really to isolate minerals and battery recycling from the total life cycle. When we think about access to key minerals, minimizing our reliance on a resource that can be scarce and that has volatile supply, we think of how do we maximize the life and the longevity of the batteries, and how do we enable our customers and our business areas to get the maximum value, to extract the maximum value from those batteries before they even need to go to recycling. And so there's really what we're looking at, and the way that we're seeing that the industry is starting to approach it is seeing the batteries as having three lives, essentially. You have your first life, and so your first life is the battery actually in the vehicle, the battery on the road, doing what it was initially developed to do, which is power the transportation and driving the electrification away from fossil fuels. And so in this first life, some of the key challenges that we need to address are, number one, range and longevity. If our customers have to spend 20 minutes charging their vehicles and then they're not getting the range that they can get comparable to a diesel engine, then this is gonna kill their business. And so in a first life, Volvo Energy, we're really helping figure out what are some of the solutions that we can drive to improve the longevity of those batteries. And then another piece of that first life is, how do we keep these batteries in the truck when we do identify issues? How do we ensure that there's a stable supply of field stock replacement batteries to have them in the trucks? And that's where really building out a remanufacturing and refurbishing capability for batteries comes into place. So if you have a battery that is, for example, you see that that battery's energy capacity has derated, and that, you know, from all, you know, initial assessment, it looks like it's a battery that needs to be pulled out of the truck. We might be able to diagnose that the problem is a bad module or bad electronics within the encasement, or the software in the battery needs to be updated. So we have to build out the capabilities to remanufacture or refurbish that battery so that it can go back into the trucks. And then the second life is repurposing. And it's using that battery once it comes out of the trucks in a stationary storage type solution, a solution that's no longer reliant on longevity and range on the road, but a solution that enables our customers or another tier of customers to actually use that battery to solve some of the key challenges that electrification itself is starting to present, such as grid capacity, grid reliability, and charging capacity. And so we can pull those batteries and create a second life solution, extracting more value from them until their energy capacity is truly depleted. And then we have that end of life piece, which is the recycling, the extraction of those minerals from the batteries. And that's really, I think, where a lot of this is focused. And the key takeaway that I would say, with everything that's already been said from a geopolitical and economic standpoint, the key takeaway that I would say, you know, is also important to add, and then I'll end it there, is that from a recycling standpoint, this is something that no OEM is going to be able to vertically integrate. This is a piece of the value chain that is fundamentally shifting and transforming the way we need to think about doing business, from one of linear business models and competition to one of partnerships. And so it's a very complex business arrangement between OEMs, cell manufacturers, and recycling entities themselves, and that's going to transform how we think about business. And so minerals really are at the heart of it.
Thank you. So did I understand you correctly that you are like doing circular economy in like 3 loops? So it's
yes.
Remanufacturing or just fixing the batteries and then send them out there again?
Keeping them in their first life.
Yes,
Yep.
and then the second life is for energy storage
yes.
in the grid, and then the third is recycling of the materials.
Yes, and then essentially it goes back into its first life. It reincarnates.
Yeah. Thank you. And I will soon we will have a joint discussion and then open up for some questions. But Maria, I just want to ask you, how far have you come in the mining industry when it comes to electrification?
Yeah, I would say that this is really happening right now. I don't think that if you had asked me like 5 years ago, we would have thought that all these big mining machines could be electrified. But we now see that the OEMs are coming up with solutions that actually works for the mining industry. It's both about having a sort of a constant grid connection or an overhead, you know, where you can take the electricity out, or shift the batteries in order not to have those breaks that you were talking about, you know, where you have to charge your machines. So you just lift it out and put in a new battery instead. And this is actually happening. So for example, we have an expansion of a mine where that part of the mine will be fully electric. That is being under construction right now. So this is happening.
Great. So how are we on? We have time. So I just want to pose one question to all of you, and that's regarding collaboration and preferably transatlantic cooperation. And given what you have heard here today, from your colleagues in this panel, but also during the entire afternoon, have you gotten any ideas for new transatlantic cooperations? What can we do together for decreasing the vulnerability in the supply chain of critical minerals, but also for the green transition as a whole?
I'll jump in first. I think the ongoing collaboration between the U.S. and the EU through a number of different fora, right, is a space to continue to watch and will mature over time. The EU is obviously a member of the Mineral Security Partnership, and I think as a body, the MSP is starting to really gain some strong momentum, in so much as directly investing in certain key projects and enabling the frameworks for a more resilient mineral supply chain. Aside from that, I think you call it the bilateral relationship between the EU and the United States is going to continue to mature as well. Obviously, with the EU-US Leaders Summit later this month, hopefully we'll have, we'll get a critical minerals agreement across the finish line there, which will enable a little bit more of the mutual access, right, that's needed to build kind of the economies of scale for alternative supply chains, de-risk supply chains, whatever have you. But on that the last point I'll make in terms of spaces to watch or new ideas that I think we as a policy community need to be mindful of is, when we talk about what a de-risked supply chain ultimately looks like, are we speaking the same language? Do we have the same sort of reference point by what makes a supply chain sufficiently de-risked? With an eye to, frankly speaking, China is the elephant in the room in these discussions. Coming together and having an effective conversation about what is an acceptable role for China in these supply chains, because you won't be able to completely excise China out from these material supply chains. Determining as a transatlantic community what that role can be will not only help underpin the US-EU partnership on these supply chain tools, but also form the framework for the US and the EU together to go to the global south where a lot of this resource concentration is, and have productive conversations around engaging Argentina, engaging Chile, engaging in Indonesia in a de-risked supply chain, because frankly China is already in those spaces. So those three pieces. MSP is going to continue to mature and develop. The bilateral relationship on the transatlantic agenda will continue to mature, but ultimately advancing a productive conversation around what we mean when we say a de-risked supply chain is ultimately what we need to figure out.
Thank you. I think really we could work more together when it comes to the innovation agenda, because that is really something we also need. We need to develop the technologies, both in exploration and mining, but also in recycling, where we actually don't have the technology to recycle many of these materials. Today, I would say that, for example, rare earth elements, we recycle zero. There is no recycling in the world of rare earth elements, more or less. So, I mean, we need to develop these kind of technologies, and how can we recycle more, how can we keep it in the loop for a longer time, and how can we find the synergies between primary and secondary production, because I think we will need that. So that is something I think we could definitely work more on together across the Atlantic.
Yeah, I second that, and I'll even expand upon it. So, I mean, transatlantic cooperation is sort of every single day for me. More than half of my colleagues are located in Sweden, and then there's the whole US side of what we do. And we are at the same time trying to solve the same challenges and work together to expand Volvo Energy operations in both continents, but also we're reliant on one another to figure a lot of this stuff out. So for example, when we're thinking about repurposing, there is an expanding battery life before it needs to get recycled. Energy storage, stationary energy storage here in North America is far advanced beyond, I think, the rest of the world. We have something like 19 gigawatt hours of energy storage deployed today in North America, with a projected growth of something like a 30% compound annual growth rate, especially fueled by the IRA between now and 2030. So when we think about that, I think what we have to contribute to this transatlantic cooperation to a great deal is not just the innovation around the technology itself for both recycling as well as maximizing the value we can get out of batteries in a stationary storage product, but also building out the whole ecosystem, much of which is built out from the digitization and the software capabilities to enable that technology to add value to all different tiers of operations, from industrial facilities to the power grid itself, to how do we safely manage these batteries and build out the logistic capabilities internal. And then I think what we really can benefit from on the European side and on the, particularly the Swedish side is from a regulatory standpoint. You know, here in the U.S., we have a very balkanized power grid, a very balkanized utility regulatory environment, and a very balkanized, you know, even at the local, state, and national levels from a policy environment. We're very, very fractured. And so if we can look to Sweden and understand how countries like Sweden have been able to address all of the different local and regional challenges to come up with a more uniform policy, and how that policy has been able to rapidly accelerate this move towards decarbonization and electrification, I think we have a lot to learn from there. And as a single organization, as a single company with a foot in each continent, I think our job is to figure out how we can move on the regulatory side in tandem so that we can push on our end some of those regulatory changes that need to happen here in North America.
Thank you. And there's actually a government bill on energy, an energy policy bill coming up in Sweden this fall. So that will be sort of a good opportunity to continue the exchange. Yes. I would like to have at least 2 questions from the audience. 2 quick questions. Microphone here in the middle of the left, yes.
I'm Jeffrey Brown from paneltech.us. Now, my question is, how can you create sustainable and resilient supply chains around critical minerals when it's difficult to obtain?
I'll take a swing first, because I factor, I think 3 pieces go into sustainability. You have the sustainability of the operations at the mine itself, right? So that includes you know, the electrification of that mining equipment to make sure that what has, you know, historically been a very, very emissions intensive extractor process is as light on emissions as possible. It comes down to environmental land use around the mine when it comes to thinking about water usage, et cetera. And it also comes down to, you know, what you're doing with the mine after the fact. So that's one bucket of the sustainability troika, you might call it. The second is associated with local community engagement, right? I think you see in a number of resource-rich countries, there is a significant amount of fatigue associated with the resource client model that has predicated the last 50 or so years of you know, mining in a lot of these areas. So effective community engagement, bring local value add to these communities is absolutely critical. The third piece, which frankly doesn't get talked a lot about, but is absolutely imperative when you think about the sustainability of our mineral supply chains moving forward. It's like I gotta fly. It's a bit of a Mike Pence issue. Is actually the governance of the supply chain, right? You're talking about minerals markets that are very non-transparent, that have historically been traded in very challenging amounts in different volumes. They don't operate like traditional commodity markets. And I think as you've seen us become more dependent on these minerals, you've begun to see that stress emerge. Just thinking about last year when the nickel contract on the London Metals Exchange collapsed, right? We don't have the market governance structures to really we don't have the market and governance structures to absorb the amount of demand that we're going to have for these minerals, and the quantity of these minerals that are going to be traded by the time you get to 2050. So those 3 pieces, right? You have the sustainability in the lens of, you know, is the mine sustainable? A couple features in that realm. Sustainability in regards to, is the engagement around the mine, right, productive and sustainable over the long term? And thirdly, is the overall governance we're building into these markets sustainable as well?
Maria, you wanted to
just
add?
a short remark on that. I mean, I agree with all what you said, but I also think it's very important that the customers and the OEMs that actually use these materials start to ask the questions, start to demand that it is sustainably produced, that you ask the questions on where do you get your raw material from. And I think that is really also what is needed in this perspective, that we also enlighten the customers and the companies that use these. We have looked at raw materials like something that is only, you know, you just get it from a world market, no matter what. And as long as I don't have it in my backyard, I'm happy. let's take it from somebody else's backyard. And I think we need to start to ask those questions. And that's why also I think it's very good, for example, that the European legislation now also talks a lot about sustainability in the value chains, so that is part of the equation that we need to develop further in order to create these sustainable value chains.
Yeah, I'd actually like to expand specifically on that point. We're seeing a slow growth in adoption of ESG reporting. So for large corporations, environmental social good reporting it's a very specific protocol for how it gets reported, how it gets measured, and one of the big pieces is Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. So not just what is the carbon footprint, the environmental impact of your immediate operations and products, but also how do you measure that from where you're sourcing it and from all of the ancillary logistics and activities that need to go from extracting it from the mines and bringing it all the way ultimately to you having an electric vehicle. And so I think as ESG reporting gets more widely adopted, you're going to have more of that transparency, more of that visibility on paper reported on an annual basis. And there is now more data that's showing that companies that have higher scoring ESG ratings actually have a higher market share. Their share value is higher. So I think we're going to start seeing some of that, and that in and of itself is going to drive innovation, because I think the challenges that need to be solved to reduce the carbon impact, for example, and the environmental impact of mining, I think those challenges are not impossible to solve. I think when you think about like what Ray spends his days in construction equipment in these remote off-grid sites, we're already starting to really figure out some of the solutions that are making those off-grid sites low to zero emission sites. And so if you look at that and scale it up to a mining site, we're essentially going to be able to create what is a self-sustaining zero carbon system down the road. And really what's going to drive that and incentivize it is that transparency in reporting and having that transparency linked to company value.
Thank you. We have one question here in the third row, and that will, unfortunately, that will be the last question. And if you have more questions to the panelists, you can take them afterwards in the mingle. Yes, please.
Science Foundation, and I just wanted to see if you could expand on this last comment that you made, because I do believe that we're heavily reliant on the multinational corporations to transition us to a circular economy, and you've commented you see that happening. Could you tell us a little bit more about where you see near-term solutions that can be implemented to make a big impact for climate, and where there may be opportunities for development of research solutions? Sure. Where are the gaps?
Sure. So I will speak, just to give an answer that has some value. I'll speak mostly to what I deal with day in and day out. At a more global level, I think that there are concepts that I'm a little less directly involved in. But in terms of where, so just so I understand the question properly, you want to know where are the R&D and innovation opportunities, and how are we going to create those opportunities? Excellent. So I think, first and foremost, a lot of those opportunities now already exist in the form of renewable energy, which has really become viable, as economically viable, if not more viable than things like natural gas combustion. And when I talk about reuse and repurposing of batteries, the reutilization and repurposing of batteries into, or first life batteries, moving them into second life as energy storage. So a big opportunity is going to be just in scaling that, because what we're already seeing is as we're scaling energy storage, it's already reducing the reliance on, and you're seeing utilities shift investments away from things like natural gas, and they're asking the public service commissions to approve rate-based funding for large energy storage plants that are backed by renewable energy. So that's I wouldn't say an area for more R&D, but that's a huge opportunity for us to continue to drive emissions reductions in these areas. And so the more that we can do at scale to expand it, I think the better off we'll be. From a R&D standpoint, I think a big piece of that does come from the government. A big piece of what we need to see that's going to lead to the new technologies and to the improvement of battery chemistries, new battery chemistries that are going to reduce reliance on critical minerals, longevity, the things that are going to maximize that battery life comes out of national labs oftentimes. And so I think to the extent that we can fund that and we can come up with policy that supports that, we're really going to see the rapid transformation of those innovations and technologies.
Thank you. I just want to add that we have, Sweden and the US has a bilateral agreement on basic energy research, which is, that comes in handy. And also we have the Swedish Energy Agency here in the room, and we have the Swedish Innovation Agency, Vinnova. So please reach out to them regarding R&D collaboration. And please join me in giving our panelists a hand. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry we didn't have more time. This was really interesting. Thank you.
So I've been asked to give concluding remarks, so I'm the one standing between you and the reception. And so first I would like to thank all speakers, moderators, co-hosts and partners. And then I skip that part and go to the second. So I think this event has brought thanks government representatives, expert industry leaders from various fields together today to discuss important aspects of green transition. And overall, this conference has hopefully delivered invaluable platform for knowledge sharing. And we do hope that it will continue with action and that you will come back next year. And then we can summarize a lot of accomplishment. That would be fantastic. And today we have listened to strategies for cities, how industrialization of buildings can reduce the waste with 90%, reduce waste with 52% and transport with 90%. I mean, these are fantastic figures. So there are a lot of solutions out there. We have heard about electrifying the construction equipment and also put them outside. So there is a lot of things to do. But what we also hear is that we need change of behavior. We need a lot of discussions, so all of us can take responsibility and contribute to those discussions. We can put demands on cities and push forward. We have also listened to the critical minerals and learned that there are no less than 3 lists of critical minerals in the US. So there is a lot of things to do for us going forward. But we have also, someone asked, why don't we do what we did in, I don't remember the city now, but with electrified construction equipment. So I have one last news to share. Today we sent out a press release about a new partnership to electrify the construction industry. So it's a Swedish consortium that joins to initiate electrify of the US construction industry. It is Atlas Copco, Volvo Group, and Husqvarna Construction that teams up with Sweden US Green Transition Initiative to do this. So the only thing we need now, please call us, we want a construction site. And I think this marks a milestone in a journey towards more sustainable construction sector. It is actually the first ever collaboration of this kind among these 3 big companies. And they are industry pioneers. I think we have seen that today in the forefront and cutting edge electrified construction equipment. So if you haven't yet looked at the machines, do that during the reception. We also have Pioneer the Possible up here, an exhibition showcasing more solutions as well. So with this good news, I invite you all to the network reception. Thank you.